Good evening, everyone. My name is Sue, and I am a program associate here at the Elmhurst Public Library. Just a few things to run through before we get started. We're using a hybrid format this evening, so we have viewers both here in person as well as online. If you are watching from Zoom, we're using a webinar format, and so you can see and hear us, but we cannot see or hear you. We're going to do question and answer at the end of the program. So those of you on Zoom can add your questions to the Q&A and or the chat as the program proceeds. Here in person, please hold your questions to the end, and then I'm going to come around with a microphone, this microphone, so that our viewers on Zoom can hear you as well. If you are on Zoom and would like to see a live transcript option, you're going to look for the toolbar and then show captions. If you don't see that, look for more and captions. The library is using our assisted listening system. It's pretty easy to use. It's a headphone. I'd be happy to lend one to you. Just come see me in the back of the room. Please take this moment right now to silence your cell phones and any other devices. And I have two programs to tell you about. The first one is coming up this week. Sorry. On Thursday, May 22nd from 7 to 8 p.m. This is a hybrid program, Pet First Aid Basics. And the DuPage County Animal Services will be here to cover preventative care, plus how to treat wounds, broken bones, choking, and more. And on Tuesday, May 27th from 7 to 8 p.m., another hybrid program, handwriting analysis for fun and insight. And if you're interested in either one of those programs, I'd be happy to register you. Just come see me after the program. If you are on Zoom, I'm going to put links to those programs into the chat. Right. So tonight we have Mead and Dylan Taylor. They are the co-founders of Chicago Mushroom Club. They are amateur mycologists, public speakers, community organizers, writers, and educators. Chicago Mushroom Club is currently researching fungal diversity in Graceland Cemetery. As a pair, Mead and Dylan have documented over 500 species of fungi within Chicago's city limits. Many of these fungi haven't been documented in Chicago before, and many haven't been documented previously in Illinois. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Going good.
I'm Mead,
I'm Dylan. Nice to meet you guys. Thanks for being here.
and today we're going to be talking about how fungi help shape the Midwest. And like Sue said, we're the co-founders of Chicago Mushroom Club. It's a free mushroom education club. We have bi-monthly meetups, sometimes just lectures like this, but a lot of times we'll go out into neighborhoods or various parks and preserves within the city limits of Chicago, and we'll just discuss what we find and talk about how we identify what we're looking at. We really prioritize hands-on experience because that's how we both learned, and I think it's the most effective way.
And our group also really focuses on accessibility as far as making some of the things that we do accessible to people who may not have access to vehicles, money to participate in events like this that may traditionally cost some money to partake.
Yeah, and so to see our upcoming schedule to possibly join us on an outing, you can go to our Instagram at Chicago Mushroom Club or our website, chicagomushrooms.org. And if you use iNaturalist, he is Dylan Tom Taylor on iNaturalist, and I am Pig Boy.
And we'll talk about iNaturalist more at the end of the presentation, just in case you aren't on it. We can talk about what it is.
This is just a quick overview of what we're going to go through today, but we have a lot to get to, so I'll just kind of breeze through.
Sure.
So we'll just do a brief intro to fungal biology. Kingdom fungi. For years, we thought that fungi were closely related to plants rather than animals, but we found that the chitinous cell walls actually placed them in their own kingdom, and we didn't find that out until the 60s. So that's why we love mycology and being amateur mycologists in particular, just because you can make contributions and change the field any day, you know, with just any observation that you find, because we're still learning so much and we still have so much to learn about fungi. But yeah, the heterotrophic nature make fungi more closely related to Animalia than Plantae.
So just a quick basic introduction about the two of the most common ways that fungi and mushrooms reproduce. We'll just be touching on these throughout the talk. The most common way that we talk about mushrooms reproducing is sexually, and this is when we have what would be referred to as a mushroom or a fruiting body. This is shown at the bottom here, and it starts from spores. Do you want to use the so right on the bottom there. So over here, we start with spores. Two spores have to link up on their own to germinate in order to create the mycelium. We'll touch a little more on what mycelium is. And this is more common. This is the sexual reproductive form, and this helps to add in genetic diversity into the species. Another way that they commonly reproduce is asexually. This kind of just skips the step where they need to meet up in the wild. They go ahead and reproduce asexual spores. Those spores just immediately germinate and turn into mycelium.
When we talk about fungi is kind of like the overreaching name of the entire organism. A lot of people will just think of like a mushroom that they see coming out of the ground or an ascomycete that they see on a log, but the actual body of the mushroom is in the mycelium or like the mushroom roots, basically. So the majority of that body of the fungus is not visible to the naked eye unless, there's a little bit of mycelium coming up out of the ground or out of the substrate. But when mycelium encounters a food source, it secretes enzymes that break it down into digestible compounds for the fungus to consume. And the fungus is capable of reproducing asexually in this form and often will go long periods of time without any sexual reproduction. So a lot of fungi that you see when you see a mushroom pop up, that is just a sexual reproductive organ, basically, just there to distribute spores. So think of like an apple on an apple tree, whereas the entire organism would be a tree, but the mycelium itself is a little more inconspicuous under the ground or in the substrate, whether it be a log or a piece of wet moldy paper.
Here's
These are,
just a cool photo of, or two cool animations of mycelium growing. This is less zoomed in. You can see that it sort of seeks out food in a radial pattern. And then here's a much closer scanning electron microscope view of mycelium growing, and you can actually see that these individual threads that make up the body are very, very capable of quickly transporting materials throughout the body of the fungus. So what you're seeing here is things like sugars and different food being shoveled or being funneled throughout the organism.
and fungi are very efficient at finding their
Very.
food sources and at delivering the nutrients that need to be delivered to various parts of the organism. So we can talk about types of fungi as well. There's a classification within within the fungal system. So
There's three main fields of how we classify fungi. The top two are the kind of boring ones, phylogeny and taxonomy. Those are based on things like genetics, how these organisms are related to one another. Today, we're going to be focused more on the ecological classifications of these mushrooms and fungi. This is more based on how these organisms interact with their surroundings, which is a good insight on what they're doing in the environment and how they're sort of contributing to our greater ecology.
and it's just a little bit easier to identify an ecological classification from the naked eye rather than having to go into the actual genetics of the species for the phylogeny and taxonomy.
You can see. So right here, we just have a basic idea of what phylogeny and taxonomy look like. So I'll just briefly say here, the phylogenetic makeup of fungi are very, very vast. Everything you see here is within the kingdom fungi, but these two groups at the very bottom, Basidiomycota and Ascomycota, are essentially all of the mushrooms that any of us have heard of, any of us have ever seen. The rest are microscopic. They're very, very hard to find. They maybe exist in extremely rare locations. I should say there's a few other ones that we get into here, like Entomoptera, but we'll touch on that later. But the main majority of what we talk about are basidiomycetes and ascomycetes. And what that is quickly.
Yeah, so ascomycetes, we kind of define as cup fungi. So that would be this one right here, where the spores, or like the mushroom seeds, are sent out through either wind, transfer of like any kind of movement. But the ascomycete discharges the spores upwards and outwards, whereas basidiomycetes are what you traditionally think of as a fungus, the club fungi, where it's a stem and a cap, or a
The more
downward
traditional
facing,
mushrooms you see.
traditional sporing surface.
So we're going to talk a little bit about different spore surfaces throughout throughout our presentation. What you see on the left here is the most typical, which is referred to as gills, which are long knife-shaped ridges where the spores are produced. It creates extra surface area to produce more spores. Another spore-bearing surface we often come along is a pored surface, which is essentially a modified gill, right? Or a gill is a modified pore. They're just a little bit tighter, more compact, and the spores are produced on the inside of the little holes as opposed to along the edges of the gills.
And the spore-bearing surface is important for trying to identify the fungi that you're looking at, just because that will help break down what species it actually is, because certain species only ever produce pores, certain species only ever produce gills, and it just kind of helps you narrow down what species you're looking at. These are teeth. So teeth are a different spore-bearing surface, where instead of coming out of a pore or coming off of a gill, they drop down off of these little knife-like teeth, and they're just fun.
Little spines. This is just another example of a different type of pores that have co-evolved or evolved separately from the other type of pore we just discussed. They look very similar, but they've reached that conclusion on their own. They're not really related to one another genetically, but you do often see this in the fungal kingdom, where whatever works best for them, they just adapt. And these mushrooms here, boletes, have adapted by producing pores as well. So next, we're going to talk a little bit about fungi and the Midwest, some of their ecological classifications, and then some of the environmental factors that are going on, how they're kind of helping out, and what makes the Midwest a little bit unique when it comes to fungi.
I moved here from Florida, and there's a lot of fungal diversity in Florida, but moving to the Midwest, it's like I used to call it the Fertile Crescent of fungi, just because there was so many different species, and especially now that I've lived along the Great Lakes Basin essentially for my entire time in the Midwest, I've noticed a lot of really interesting diversity that just kind of follows along almost native trade routes in a way. So we don't get into that as much. That's more of my hypothesis on certain species and how it's how they've moved from places like the Upper Peninsula of Michigan along Lake Superior down to the shores of Lake Michigan.
So the Midwest and a large portion of the Northeast, I can show you. As recently as 10 to 15,000 years ago, portions of Illinois, including just the Chicagoland region and the area north, and then the entire Great Lakes region, as well as the New England region up into some areas in Canada here, towards the border of this giant ice sheet, the Laurentide ice sheet. All these areas were covered by the same glacier as recently as 10 to 15,000 years ago. So as that glacier went back, all of this land was starting to become exposed at around the same time, which means that most of the organisms that came out after the glaciation in these areas, they have all had about the same time to take root and speciate. So something we see in this area is that a lot of the species will overlap. So some species that grow up in Michigan and Wisconsin and Minnesota, we'll find them right around down here as well because they've been evolving for the same amount of time and they haven't speciated from one another, despite if they've been so far from one another. Whereas if you start to get lower, where these areas weren't covered by glaciers as recently, these fungi that you find down here are completely genetically different to the fungi that we find here because they've had so much longer of a time to be evolving into new organisms and what we call speciating. So after the Great Ice Sheet melted, a large portion of the Midwest, and specifically Chicagoland region, was oak savannas. And oak savannas are they've been dwindling since European colonization. According to the Morton Arboretum Oak Connectivity Project, only 17% of these habitats remain. Before, there was over 1 million acres of this oak habitat. And it's a unique habitat. It offers a lot of light variability for different fungi, for different animals, and for different plants to have a succession and a life cycle that really did shape the way that the Midwest was supposed to be. And some of that has been taken away. And removing some of these oaks has opened a lot of ground for invasives and different species of plants to come in and sort of take over where native plants should be thriving. So you can go ahead here.
Okay, yeah. Fungi, including some of our favorite edibles, be it like Griffla frondosa, the hen of the woods, they thrive in oak habitats. There's a lot of mycorrhizal or mycorrhizal fungi or fungi that basically share a almost symbiotic relationship with the environment. So sometimes they have just really long associations, like the ash bolete only grows among ash trees, and there's different fungi that have different relationships with different plants. Morels are mycorrhizal, but because of these relationships, it's important to sustain habitats, and a lot of the fungi that we love to eat grow around oaks. So we lose those fungi when we lose those oaks. And we are seeing that oak habitats are being replanted and stewarded. We were just in the Wooddale Grove Preserve this afternoon, and there's a lot of good oaks out there. There's also a lot of buckthorn.
A lot of invasives, yeah, but they're working towards a better habitat, absolutely.
But also, we've discussed in the past, fungi are pretty adaptable, and we've seen even like almost micro evolutions within single fruitings of fungi just to adapt to a hostile environment, basically, a human environment. But fungi in these new and restored habitats are finding new niches and helping to create the right environments for rehabilitation.
So even some of the buckthorn that we saw is a very common invasive species that shades out a lot of other plants. Today, as we're walking through the forest, we found a lot of buckthorn that was covered in a fungus that won't necessarily kill the buckthorn, but it will sort of help to keep the buckthorn populations a little bit lower. And also there are other saprobic mushrooms, which we'll touch on in a minute, that are capable of breaking down these invasive species once they do die. And that can be very beneficial as well.
So yeah, when we talk about ecological classifications of fungi, we're basically talking about these fungi's role in the environment. And so each of these have their own role: saprobes, parasites, pathogens, and mycorrhizal fungi. I kind of touched on mycorrhizal, but saprobes, saprobes are decomposers. They love to eat dead stuff. They're the trash men, you know, picking up your garbage and getting rid of it. They are capable of decaying lignin and cellulose. They have the most noticeable ecological role. You'll probably notice more saprobes than anything,
Yes.
just because we have a lot of dead stuff that needs decaying. And they're the most often documented fungi, but they basically recycle organic material into potable soil. A lot of times people will send us a photo of some mushrooms growing in their garden and go, how do I get rid of these? Like, what are they? And it's actually a sign of good soil health because those fungi are doing their jobs in decaying or breaking down unused and unnecessary dead material that would otherwise just take up space and resources that can be redistributed into the entire network of the environment.
And part of what makes saprobes so important is what we mentioned back one slide, that they are capable of breaking down cellulose and lignin. These are the two major components of wood and woody plants. And there aren't many organisms other than fungi that are as proficient or even capable of breaking down these two compounds. So there's people who often theorize that if fungi didn't exist, the forests would just be stacked miles high with the trees of every generation before us.
Fire season would be a lot worse.
Yes.
So an example of a sapro would be Galerina marginata, the funeral bell. This is one of the more dangerous to ingest species that we have around here. What are they eating?
In this photo,
Yeah.
there's a piece of wood that's buried beneath the moss here that these mushrooms are eating. They typically do cause rot of different dead wood in the forest, and they are one of the deadly toxic mushrooms that occur in our area.
We don't have too many.
No, there's not
but
many, but
they are
that's
one of them. You can do
Yeah, this is another interesting saprobe we come across often. It's called Chlorosaboria, or the turquoise elf cup. You can see these small blue cups growing on the inside of this log. If you're not lucky enough to find the little cups fruiting, you will probably often find a piece of blue wood in the forest. If you just walk through the forest, most forests we've been to are scattered with pieces of blue wood. And that's because the mycelium that lives within that log is has a strong blue pigment in it. It's an interesting pigment that has a lot of different scientific properties, as far as being turned into a paint and being used as a bioreactor on small computer chips. It's also been used in art, looking for wood that is spalted with the fungus. So you can find beautiful wood with blue patterns throughout it, used in art throughout history.
And it's a really good example of what we were talking about, where the actual organism itself is kind of unseen, but in this case, you can see
You
the
get to see
effect
it
that it's
'cause
having.
blue.
But the to actually find the fruiting body is pretty rare. I think we've only found it a handful of
Couple of
times, and I mean, we come across blue wood almost every time
Yep.
we go through a preserve or a forest area. So it is really fun when you can. So if you ever see a chunk of a log or something stained blue, just flip it over, check.
Remember
'Cause
where it is and check on a very humid day. Seems like they lay
very
low till it's
small.
nice and humid.
They're very small.
Here's another interesting mushroom we find in the preserves around Chicagoland pretty often. It's like we mentioned earlier, it's a basidiomycete fungus, which you can see at the top of the taxonomy here. That is just a fancy word for that it's a mushroom that has a cap, stem, and gills, and it produces its spores on a club-shaped appendage. But this one, I just love the shaggy cap, and the coloration on these gills is sort of a nice maroon with almost looks like the gill edges are lined with dew, but that's actually just a nice feature of the gills of the mushroom. Just a pretty one that we come across.
Litinus tigrinus, again, you can see that it's growing along wood, so it's doing that saprobic role of breaking down what is probably just a dead log or dead piece of bark.
This is an
David is
interesting
studying these,
fungus
right?
because yes, there's a college on the East Coast in outside of Boston that is studying this fungus because it has a very, very interesting feature, which we can see in the photo here. This mushroom typically has gills, and in this photo, you can kind of see that it looks a little bit flat, like there's something almost in between each of the gills. It looks almost like some mold, maybe, or something you can see some of the gills peeking through here. But this is what's called a semi-secotioid fungus, which means that it typically has gills, but it also contains a gene that causes it occasionally to revert back to producing pores, like we discussed earlier. Most of the mushrooms in this genus, Lentinus, have pores instead of gills. So we were able to catch this fungus in a form where it is kind of tapping into some latent DNA and reverting back to its old form by producing pores. And a wonderful, the group that's studying this fungus, yearly they come to Chicago, to the Chicago River, to make collections of this fungus because this is a very a known hotspot for them. They grow only along riverbeds and seem to love the Chicago River.
Omphallotus illudens. This is a really fun mushroom that we have around the Chicago area. These in particular, I think we found in Glenview, but the really fun part about these guys is that they are able to glow in the dark naturally. So without UV reaction or anything like that. It is, you know, a lighter glow,
Dull.
a dull glow, but these are also a look-alike of the very highly sought after chanterelle mushrooms. So it is particularly important to know the difference because these guys will not taste very good and they will make your tummy upset. Um, so you can see that there's an actual delineation basically between the gills and the stipe or the stem, whereas chanterelles kind of come down the stem a little bit. But these guys, some people say that native populations called them foxfire because they were able to light the way in the dark. But yeah, they're just a really cool fungi.
Yeah,
that
if
we
you
find
come
around
across a
here.
good fruiting and you're able to go back at dusk and let your eyes sort of adjust to the dark, you may be able to see a faint glow. This is just another beautiful mushroom we come across a lot in the springtime here in the Chicagoland region, Mycena leana. It's another saprobe, so you can see it's just breaking down a log that was dead in the forest. And it just has this beautiful orange coloration, sort of shocking to find in a sea of brown and green.
This Dylan calls the queen of the woods because it's so prolific. We find it everywhere. It's Ductifera pullulana, or the white jelly fungus. I call it ghost jelly because it's almost like a ghost version of a jelly fungus where the translucence is pretty cool, but as they age, they kind of turn like a browner color. But again, all these fungi in this saprobe family that we're going through are doing an important role of decaying whatever they're on or whatever substrate they're growing out of. So this Ductifera that you'll find everywhere is usually just munching away on logs, redistributing those resources to the rest of the environment.
It's a successful hunter.
Very successful.
This is also a very successful hunter. Schizophyllum commune is the name of this mushroom, or the split gill mushroom. It's very small and it's very prolific. It's been noted on 6 of 7 continents, all continents except for Antarctica. Could be there, maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, maybe
We don't
haven't
know
found it
yet. But it's unique in the fact that it has what we refer to as mating pairs. It has over 20,000 mating pairs for the mushroom to utilize in order to find a partner in the wild. So it's often referred to as having over 20,000 possible genders, kind of leading into the idea that biology is not always so straightforward when it comes to sex and gender.
And honestly, the proliferation of the species is due to the fact that it is very adaptable and
Absolutely.
it finds its mate and it does what it needs to. If, you know, a certain mating type isn't working out, it makes a new one.
Yeah.
So yeah, we will find this everywhere.
Yeah.
Distinguishing feature would be it has almost like little hairy cap and these specific, what we call split gills. This one, Agaricus bitorcus, is one of my favorites. It's called the pavement mushroom because it grows in, you know, paved areas, but also because it literally grows with a force so strong it's able to break up pavement. So if you can see here, this is asphalt from the parking lot next to our apartment that the fungi has literally pushed up in its growth cycle. This is also closely related to Agaricus bisporus, which is the portobello mushroom, the button mushroom, white button mushroom, brown, it's all the same.
Cremini mushroom, all the same.
Cremini
Yep.
mushroom. There's some conspiracy that there's a lobby out there trying to make Americans only eat the one species of
Yes.
fungi. Because when you go to the grocery store and you look in the mushroom section, unless it's got some like nice 4-star organic
Sure.
mushrooms, the majority of
And a
what you're going to
markup.
find will just be the agaricus bisporus. So when people say they don't like to eat mushrooms, I'm saying it's probably because you're eating one
The
species,
same
and
one.
yeah, they're not awesome. But people do eat these, but they usually grow in like Jewel Osco parking lots. They're not ideal.
Not the best.
But yeah, these are really fun. You'll start to see them everywhere. And again, this is a
Actual slab of asphalt from our parking lot, completely supported by the mushrooms. I mean,
yes,
it could
and broken off from the
broken,
rest of
yes.
the asphalt.
Another common mushroom we find all over the city. We included this because it's extremely prolific in the cities. It's what people call a little brown mushroom, which can be very boring. But we still enjoy all the little brown mushrooms. Just means they're harder to figure out what they are if they all look alike, right?
And it has such a cute name.
It does. Tuberia furfuracea, the scurfy twiglet.
Yeah.
Grows under a lot of different trees, but it's typically decaying dead grass and dead grass roots. So you'll often find it in a big long lawn with no trees around, wonder what it's eating. There's old root systems from the grass, and that's what's helping break down that woody material.
These are bird's nest fungi. This particular species of bird's nest fungi is Cyathus stercoraeus, and it's the dung-loving bird's nest fungi, which you can assume what it is eating. Doesn't necessarily mean there has to be like a thick layer of poop anywhere on the ground. It's usually pretty well hidden. But we find these a lot in wood chips.
Yeah,
That's why urban fungi foraging is so fun, because of these different landscaping features. People will bring in wood chips from all over. We've found all kinds of strange species
absolutely.
just because the wood chips that, are processed wherever, whether it be like an Australian processing facility or something, no matter how hard they try, they can't get that mycelium out. So we find all sorts of really fun species, and I always encourage people to look in your neighbors' yards, look in your yards.
Yeah, these are covering pretty much every pile of wood chips in the city throughout
And
the
it's
summer.
really cute because they look like little birds' nests. So there'll be these little cup-like outcroppings with little egg sacs within them.
Another common saprobe we see in the city, especially in the wood chip piles, is Coprinellus flocculosus. This is an ink cap mushroom, which means that the caps will slowly deliquesce or turn into a black inky liquid, which is very interesting. You can collect them to make your own inks or utilize them for a vegan squid ink pasta if that's something you're interested in.
They are edible. I wouldn't say they're particularly nutritious, so not necessarily worth the effort. But there's a lot of coprinoids within the city that we'll find are ink caps. These guys are distinguished from the other species of ink caps because they have what we call flocculose, or these little white flecks, or like pieces of flesh coming off the cap.
Here's an interesting mushroom we found last year a couple times, and I included it just because I'm fascinated. We found it right in the city in Rogers Park in a lawn, and I consulted basically all of the people I know who would be able to help me identify this mushroom, and none of us have really been able to identify it. So it's still a bit of a mystery, despite that it looks pretty unique. We were able to tell that it is probably one of the bluet mushrooms or lepista, but this is still one that's sort of like the white whale. We're trying to figure out what it is. Eventually, we may have a name for it, hopefully. Another cool saprobe that you can only find in fire pits and places that have recently been burned is a mushroom called Pyronyma omphaliotes. It's this orange sort of mat, and you can see that it's growing around a couple of charred pieces of wood. So whenever we find a burned pile in the forest, I always look for this fungus as well as other Pyromataceous fungi, which means all the fungi in this family eat burned wood and burned ground.
Because even that needs to be broken down.
Exactly. And this is one of the interesting saprobes that Mead mentioned earlier that we found that had come over from Australia, Hypholoma tuberosum, another little brown mushroom found on my work campus in Rogers Park previously. And After a little research, we found that it not only had it not been seen in Illinois before, it's not even from the United States. And we've been able to track its spread from the East Coast and the West Coast, arriving in the 80s. It has now made its way all the way to the center in Illinois, with this as the first proof that it has made it this far. So it should be widespread by now.
We can start kind of speeding through a little
Sure.
bit more. I just realized it's 7:30, but we can talk about parasites now. So whereas the saprobes were eating things, parasites are taking over things or
Stealing
infecting
their
things.
nutrients.
Yeah. Like
Uh,
syrup.
Yes, parasites. They live on and consume living materials. So trees, plant stems, fruits, leaves, other mushrooms. Um, Oftentimes they begin as parasites, and then when their host dies, they become saprobes and consume whatever is left. And they can either damage the host or at, benefit more than the host in the relationship. So they can take a little bit more than they are giving. This is an interesting parasite that can also become a saprobe. We call it the artist bracket. It's a large fungus, Ganoderma applanatum, can live decades. This one here, we were told by the steward of this forest that it was at least 7 years old. So we've been going back and checking it every year. Last year, we went and found some cicada shells that were being consumed by the fungus, which was an interesting photo. It's not eating the shells, but it's exhibiting its ability to grow around anything that gets in its way. It will do this to plant stems or any other material.
In this particular species, it's a cousin of the reishi mushroom, the Ganoderma sessile that you'll find, in fancy teas and what have you. But these fungi are all over the city, and they all kind of share the ability to just sort of grow through whatever's in their
Anything.
way.
The beetle on the right was just to say that they have a great relationship with beetles. So we love to leave them in the wild when we find them, because some beetles live their entire life cycle on the mushroom. They never leave it. It's their home forever.
This mushroom is really cool. I always tell people it's a super metal mushroom, Armillaria malea, the honey mushroom. So honey mushrooms, like he was saying, with certain fungi that start as parasites and become saprobes, this guy is particularly adept at killing trees. So over time, it evolutionarily realized that it was a lot easier to kill a tree by girdling it or choking the outer surface, where trees are able to deliver nutrients through that outer layer right under the bark. And so what you're looking at here is basically mycelium, or those mushroom roots, but with a melanated sheath to make it strong and make it basically a noose for the tree. So it girdles the tree, and over time, that tree loses the ability to deliver nutrients to the entire organism and dies. And so that's when this mushroom goes from parasite to saprobe, and it eats. So if you see these fungi in your yard, whatever tree that they're near is going to come down soon. So be careful.
One of our favorite mushrooms to eat is the hen of the woods. It's also called Grifola frondosa. It's a parasite that can also turn into a saprobe. Again, it's mostly found on living oak trees. So if you're looking for this, find somewhere where there's lots of oak trees. We usually find it right off the side of the path next to a nice big oak tree that's still alive. But they've also been observed growing on dead oak trees as well. So they're
Not
considered
necessarily
both.
as aggressive as like the
No,
honey mushrooms, though. So they're not a sign of danger to your oak if you do see
no,
them.
they could live for years, the tree.
Entoloma abortivum, I call them shrimps of the woods. So basically, it's a fungi of mycoparasite. So it's a parasite of another fungi. So it's a parasite of this entoloma here. So this is what the fungi would look like without the parasite.
That's so the mushroom, the white mushroom in the center here is Entoloma abortivum. And this mushroom here, Entoloma, its mycelium grows over the honey mushrooms that we just showed in the previous slide and aborts those honey mushrooms into this mass here that we call shrimp of the woods. So if you were to look at the genetics of this little white mass, you would find both honey mushrooms and Entoloma abortivum. And this is one of the only mushrooms that really parasitizes another one, where you can find the actual fruiting body that just looks like a regular white mushroom, totally taking over honey mushrooms.
But these are the real treat. They're
Yes.
very tasty.
A delicacy. People love to eat them.
Hence
And
the shrimp of the woods.
yes, hence the
designation.
name of shrimp. This is an interesting mycoparasite. So we came across this in a sort of industrial lot behind an old building, which was very interesting. Had a very raunchy smell and this sort of greenish mold look to it. But this is Hypomyces melanocarpus. So what we have here is a bolete mushroom, or one of those large spongy mushrooms that we saw earlier, that has been completely engulfed by this greenish yellow mycoparasite, the Hypomyces here, and it makes it grow into a complete amorphous blob.
This is a different form of hypomyces that grows specifically on amanitas. So it also affects the shape and the growth pattern to make it look a little more phallic. But
Certainly.
this one is Hypomyces hyalinus.
And a quick note, most of the Hypomyces mushrooms are sought after as edibles. I know people who eat this one. The lobster mushroom, which people love, is another Hypomyces that infects milk cap mushrooms instead.
Yeah, and it really is incredible what lobsters, I think it was on our first slide of, yeah.
Yes, this is a lobster mushroom, which is a bright orange Hypomyces that infects a more typical looking mushroom and
And
creates
not only
these
does it look the color of
delicacies.
a lobster, but it also smells and
Has a
tastes very similar.
Very
It's
lobstery
very
taste.
odd.
Fascinating. Another interesting mycoparasite we put in here, Trichoderma lixii. So these little orange or these little green cushions here that are growing alongside this white mass. This is a mold, a fungus that traditionally would just be a little green mold that you would find on your bread. One of the typical molds we find in our households is a trichoderma. But Trichoderma, the genus, these fungi also have the ability to produce an asexual fruiting body, which is what we're seeing here. And I always get excited when we find a trichoderma in its asexual form, because instead of looking like a boring mold on your bread, you get a interesting little cushion.
Fluffy little cloud.
Yes.
Pathogens. So pathogens are parasitic fungi that cause disease of the host. The disease often leads to the death of the host. So these get a little bit more funding as far as studies go, just because they do actually affect our agriculture. And also there's different fungi that we've even encountered that have been important in developing things like anti-rejection drugs for people who have whether it be like immunocompromisation or if they have a organ transplant, you really don't want the body to reject that organ. So their ability to infect and kind of ingratiate themselves into their hosts is studied. And also The Last of Us, the show and the video game, have kind of
Cordyceps
popular
mushrooms
with this
are
right
very
now.
popular now.
Yeah.
And so here's some of the ones that we've come across throughout the city here. Very common plant pathogen we find. This grows on amelanchier trees or the serviceberry trees. We find this pretty much every year around this time of year. Gymnosporangium. There's a handful of Gymnosporangium species that grow on the amelanchier trees, but this one we like because we always say it produces these cool little suction cup looking fruit bodies that look a bit like a octopus's tentacles, I like to say.
But they can also produce these tentacles.
Tentacles, exactly. So this is another form of the Gymnosporangium growing on, I think, a quince tree or something along those lines.
This is another very common pathogen that you'll find pretty much is the bane of every gardener's existence, just because they spread so quickly. But powdery mildews, there's a lot of different species of the powdery mildew.
Very common. This is again on the amelanchier tree or the serviceberries, one of the more common powdery mildews we see. The white we see on the leaf is the mycelium, and then each little black dot is an individual fruiting body. So imagine a tiny little mushroom. We were able to take this leaf and look pretty closely at those fruiting bodies, and this is what they look like up close. So on the side, you can see tiny little strands of mycelium, and then this almost Velcro-looking fruit body that stores all of the spores or genetic material of the fungus. And they have evolved these beautiful appendages that act just like Velcro and stick on to things that pass by. So they can transport their spores across a larger volume.
And again, a lot of these more plain or boring looking fungi that are just sort of like irritating to see in your
Sure.
garden end up having some of the coolest micro features.
Yeah, yeah.
So
They
looking
could
under,
be completely fascinating if you look a little closer, even if they're a bit boring. Here's another good look at those sort of Velcro-like appendages. And when you crack open one of those fruit bodies, you can see a large sac full of spores that is released. This is one of the only fungi that produce a fruiting body that only holds one sac of spores, which is an interesting feature. Um, in the previous couple photos, you could, if you go back to this here, on the sides here, you can see these sort of orange globs that are growing throughout the mycelium there. And that's actually our next fungus right here, which is called Ampelomyces quisqualis. And this is a mycoparasite. So it's actually consuming and stealing its energy from the powdery mildew that we just discussed.
so it's a mycoparasite on a pathogen.
Exactly. So interestingly, what we're seeing here in the center is not orange yet because it has just started to go through mitosis or meiosis inside of the mycelial strands of the powdery mildew, which you can sort of see stretching out like a balloon there to make room for its new parasite. And this is very small. We have a scale bar here. So we're looking at about 5 or 10 microns in width there. Just a very fascinating interaction that's happening right in front of our eyes. You can go online and buy that fungus in a liquid form to spray on your plants if you're tired of your powdery mildews. So lots of different uses. Another cool fungus we found, we're switching into entomopathogens now, which is fungi that grow on insects. This is a cool entomopathogen called Pandora. We don't know what species, but it's in the genus Pandora, and it's growing on an ant.
Ants aren't supposed to be that hairy.
No, ants are not supposed to be covered in white fuzz. And interestingly, we found this ant inside of a gall, and a gall quickly is something created by a wasp. So a wasp lays its eggs on a tree, and the tree creates this nut-like thing here. We weren't really finding many mushrooms on one of our outings, so I decided to look at some galls, and I said, let's split this one open and see what's inside of it. And apparently an ant had crawled into this gall and succumbed to its fungal virus or infection, and we were lucky enough to find it. This is probably the most common entomopathogen in Chicago or in the Chicagoland area. I just found one yesterday in
Wicker Park. No,
yeah,
Bucktown.
in Bucktown, in a very industrial area on the top of an onion plant. So this fungus infects flies, common house flies, all sorts of different flies, and it convinces the fly to climb to the top of the plant that it is currently inhabiting. And when it reaches the top of that plant, the fungus will secrete through the bottom of the fly's feet and glue it right where it is. And then these sort of fungal icicles will burst out of the thorax and sort of every possible spot where the fly will sort of then remain mummified since it's glued to the plant. And then the spores will sort of slough off into the wind, which is why it wants it to climb higher, because more wind currents and further ability to spread.
And so this is when we talk about zombie fungus, basically there's cordyceps, which take over various like beetle larvae and what have you. But this one in particular really does take control of the host, make it climb to the highest point that it can, and then literally makes it secrete a liquid so its feet are stuck and it has to basically grow the spore tentacles.
Pretty metal. Here's
Yeah.
another example of the same fungus.
So if you see a fly stuck somewhere with some white flakes on its butt, try to get a close-up photo because it could be an
Absolutely.
entomopathogen. Because again, a lot of, ants bugs, flies, whatever, aren't supposed to be all fuzzy or supposed to have
Sure.
these weird flakes.
They've also been known to land on windows and then just sit there for a while. So if you ever see a fly kind of stuck on your window, and then all of a sudden a white halo appears around the fly, that's the spores that have been released from the fly. So if you can look online to see that phenomenon if you're interested. Cordyceps are a very interesting fungus that, again, take over their host insect and not only oftentimes convince it to act a certain way, but then they also take over the inside of that insect and convert it into food for themselves. This was found right on a bike path, probably 10 minutes outside of the city. Cordyceps tenuipes. It's one of the local or native cordyceps that grow in the area.
And we're still figuring out like the mechanisms with which they're able to do these things. That's why certain cordyceps will be sent for testing at the USDA to see if what kind of compounds that they're using, chemical compounds, to see what they can, what compounds they're producing to basically either suppress the immune system of the host or, in particular, the cicada fungus produces both meth and psilocybin because it's sexually transmitted, and the fungi evolved to realize that the best way to get cicadas mating was to intoxicate them with both meth and psilocybin. So they're highly evolved.
Absolutely. This is one of the most important finds that we've had in the Chicago area or at all in our mycological careers. This is another cordyceps fungus or another entomopathogen called Polypocladium inflatum. And this is the fungus that, if you go to the next slide here, it's another cordyceps. You can see that it's infecting a hornet here of some kind, and it was growing inside of this log. And the fruit body itself are those two little cushions up at the top. And so this is an important fungus because it is the one that was developed into a medication called cyclosporine that Mead was mentioning earlier, which is given to organ transplant patients so their body doesn't reject their organs.
But this particular specimen is even hopefully more important in developing a drug for anti-rejection purposes because we found it on a uncommon host, which means that it could have had some kind of microevolution to be able to suppress the immune system of a hornet rather than a beetle.
Exactly. It typically grows on beetle grubs, and this is, as far as we've been able to find, the first occurrence of this fungus on a hard-shelled insect like a wasp. So it may be secreting new compounds to break through those defenses.
And it's kind of similar to, like, when you're trying to clone plants, you find a plant with really great strong genetics, you want to isolate those genetics. This particular specimen must have had some pretty strong genetic compounds to be able to jump hosts, essentially. And then lastly, we can touch on mycorrhizal fungi. I know we want to be able to get to questions. Yeah, these are a lot of your favorite edibles. So fungi that develop mutualistic relationships with root systems of plants. It's estimated that 90% of vascular land plants benefit from mycorrhizal relationships. These relationships are at least 400 million years old. And a study showed that 50 to 70% of total carbon stored in leaf litter in a forest was held by mycorrhizal fungi. So mycorrhizal fungi are the mycoremediation species that we really need to, or classification that we really need to lean into for sustainability purposes. And just because they are the most mutualistic organism, I think that we're aware exists right now. We have a lot to learn from them.
Proof of these mushrooms is proof of a healthy forest.
Mm-hmm.
One of our favorite, most likely mycorrhizal mushrooms is Morchella americana, the white morel. This is some morels that we found in somebody's yard in North Rogers Park.
Yeah, Rogers Park.
Often we find these morel mushrooms growing in yards, oddly enough. They take a long time to set up shop with their partners, which is why they are hard to grow, which is why they are sought after as a delicacy for the dish.
And it's why if you do find them, mark that spot on the map because they will continue coming back to that area because, again, these relationships take a long, long time to establish. So by the time that you're seeing them, it's been around for a long time.
Another common mycorrhizal mushroom that we see, I put maybe here because there is some cases of them acting in a saprobic manner, breaking down materials, but this is what we call the false morel or Geometra brunea. There's a lot of hot debate about whether or not you can eat these. So that's kind of up to you. Recent studies show that they are non-toxic, but there is still a heavily debated field due to some of their lookalikes being toxic and
And
long
again,
history of them being consumed by people in the Midwest region despite their possible toxicity. These are beefsteak mushrooms, if you've ever heard of them.
there's a possibility that a lot of the reports of toxicity just come from misidentification. But again, don't go to Facebook for your fungal
Not-
IDs in a lot of scenarios. That's where we find a lot of the discourse.
Here's a very pretty mushroom we find on the banks of the Chicago River. We call it the midnight court because it's in the family Cortinariaceae, where the name court comes from, Phlegmaceum velicopium. Just a very beautiful, dark purple mushroom. Fascinating to come across.
And they're really, really cool when this particular specimen is super dark purple, but we found them with almost like a silvery orange, rusty orange,
Absolutely.
and purple combination. And quartz in particular, I don't know if you can see any.
Nah.
No, it's not a good example, but quartz are the web caps. So they have a pretty distinct webby cap. But Cantharellus chicagoensis, we have our own species of chanterelle in Chicago. So these chanterelles can only really be found in the
This
Chicago
area, yeah.
Chicagoland area. But they kind of almost have a greener tint to them than your average chanterelle, and they're a little bit more, or a
Dainty.
little diminutive,
Yes,
smaller.
they're very small. They were discovered in Chicago and named by a scientist from the Field Museum. One of my favorite mycorrhizal mushrooms are the death cap mushrooms, which these are the most toxic mushrooms in our area. They look kind of scary, which is good. I tell people it looks a little ominous. We can
They
stay
almost
away from it.
glow,
They look like
we've
they're
said.
glowing sometimes. And this is the main cause of poisonings and poisoning deaths because of mushrooms in the world wide.
Yeah, that one lady in Australia used these.
Yes.
Um,
Here's
These
a good
are-
example of the Cortinarius web caps. You can see this sort of wispy web-like material that covers the gills of the mushrooms. This is just another beautiful Cortinarius we find in the area. It's got purple, orange, yellow, all sorts of different hues. It's one of my favorite parts of those.
Lactifluus deceptivus, the deceptive milky mushroom. There's a lot of lactifluous fungi or milk cap fungi. So essentially, if you were to cut the gill surface, it would ooze latex, and it's actually latex, which is just really cool.
People have made latex material out of it. It's just very, you need lots of it as opposed to
it would take
latex
a
from rubber
large
tree.
harvest. But I mean, there's Lactifluus pipperatus in the area, which the latex is very spicy. It's like the most potent pepper, like black pepper flavor. So I know people who have dried them and dehydrated them and ground them up to use as like a very, very potent pepper.
Strong pepper substitute. This is another rare mycorrhizal fungus we found in one of the oak savannas in the area, Inosperma vinaceobruneum, recently named in 2017, sort of a newer species that has probably been here all along, but just has a very nice red coloration on the cap and stem. Another toxic one that you wouldn't want to eat.
Lactifluus hygrophoroides. This is another one of the milk caps. So you can see the latex actually there. That's what this beading is, this liquid. It's kind of sticky.
And these are one that are another one that's sought after as an edible.
Yeah, sought
mushroom.
after
They're
edible
pretty tasty. Again, another edible mushroom that people often go after are the spiny hedgehogs or the sarcodon mushrooms. Very beautiful caps, very scaly, and the teeth structures on the bottom side are one of the more pronounced teeth structures in the fungal kingdom, which are very pretty. And then some of the more common bolete mushrooms, which we talked about earlier. You can see Bolitales or Bolitaceae, the family that these mushrooms are, they have a sponge-like bottom side instead of the typical gills. And these ones stain blue when you touch them with your fingers, which is just a very interesting oxidization reaction. You can watch it happen right before your eyes. It's a very beautiful. This is just another cool toxic mushroom with a really beautiful stem that's mycorrhizal. I don't have too much to say about this one other than it's kind of cute looking.
But
it's
don't
also,
eat it.
don't eat it. And it's also a little brown mushroom, so it may be cuter to me than it is to you. One of the more common mycorrhizal mushrooms we find in all the preserves here are Lacaria mushrooms. They sort of have this long pinkish stem with a pink coloration on their gills as well. There's another example of the Lacarias, kind of showing how different they can look. Some of them are tiny and much more pink than the others. Interestingly, sometimes we don't know exactly what's going on with certain mushrooms ecologically. This is one of the wax cap mushrooms. They're called this because they look very waxy on the
They're
cap.
so cute.
And they're so cute. They have these
mushrooms.
cartoon-like colors. And they're interesting because we're not sure if they're mycorrhizal or if they're parasitic a lot of times. So this is one that's kind of up in the air. Another beautiful wax cap that has a different genus name. This one's white, has that really nice waxy sort of texture to it. Again, another the meadow wax cap. This one has a nice orange
Not sure what
coloration.
wax caps are up to. For
Yeah,
the
not
most part.
exactly sure. They kind of grow in weird spots. This one's in a meadow. A lot of the other ones are in the forest area. And then here's a really interesting wax cap that we found as well that had about a quarter or like maybe an 1/8 inch layer of pure glutinous slime coating the top. As you can kind of see how slimy it looks up here and on the edge there. Just a very interesting feature that's most likely there. So when the spores come around from beneath and land on the cap, then the mushroom ends up with a slime spore slurry. So when bugs come by and land on it, when they leave, their feet are coated in spores and slime. So there's the mushrooms that we most likely see in the area and what they're doing.
But quickly, we'll just go through where do we fit in or how can we contribute to keeping this diversity and keeping all of these fungi doing those roles that we were talking about, whether it be decaying organic material or parasitizing other things. iNaturalist, that is our best tool, especially right now with everything going on with the National Science Foundation and the defunding of a lot of really important projects. The most important thing you can do as a citizen that is free to you is using the app or the website iNaturalist to log your observations. So just take a photo of the fungi that you find, and like most of these photos, what we try to do when we take a photo of a fungi is find another, because generally if you find one mushroom, there's going to be another nearby, and set them up so that the sporing surface is visible as well as the cap and the stipe. Or if it's a cup, just make sure that you're getting as like close of a photo as possible, just because that can help for identification purposes. You don't have to know what it is. You don't have to have any idea.
And it doesn't have to just be mushrooms either. If you like
bugs,
birds, bugs, plants, whatever it is, you can just keep a running list of every organism that you've encountered or every organism you've encountered that you weren't sure what it is and you want to learn more about it.
And it's a great tool because when you post your observations to iNaturalist, say it's a general mushroom, you don't know what it is, you can just put kingdom fungi. Some nerd is going to go online and identify what it is for you. And every once in a while, we've had messages come from like Croatia, where was it? Estonia. Just there's people all over the world looking for specific species to do these projects. And every once in a while, you might come across a species that's never been documented in Illinois or has never been documented in your area. And that can contribute to our knowledge of that species. So you can do something as small as like a range extension to say that I've seen this mushroom here, and that is scientifically important because it's never been seen here before, and now we know. It can help us learn more about that species, and every once in a while, just make sure you check your iNaturalist messages, because you might have a very excited scientist in your DMs saying like, okay, I really need that. Can you send that to my lab? And just especially now with the climate of everything, citizen science is more
Yes.
important than ever.
Community science and people doing things because they're curious and not because it's the most
Profitable.
profitable is very, very needed at this time.
But yeah, so things that you can do just to help by yourself or advocate for native plants and trees. So, having native pollinator habitats, just trying to reduce the amount of invasive species
Sure.
that you're
If you're planting plants, try to
introducing.
get plants that are native or at least
And
normal in the area.
there are plenty of free guides to what is native to the area. And we always talk about mycophobia and reducing mycophobia, where a lot of people don't even want to touch a mushroom or get close to them because, oh God, what if it's toxic? There's no um, mushroom that you can handle or interact with that's going to make you sick or give you any sort of issues. It's just the actual consumption of them that is generally the problem. But getting
So
people more aware of the fungi around them allows for us to have a more fungally hospitable environment.
it could be as simple as not acting scared of mushrooms when there's a kid around you. Really.
Yeah. Inoculating your garden beds so you can just throw some live culture or
Yeah,
just
this is
old
something that
rotted fungi into your wood chips. Just see what
Yep.
comes up. See what
if you're
happens.
utilizing native mushrooms, it can be an interesting way to get some more produce from your gardens.
So join our mushroom club.
And document it all. We always love the iNaturalist. And it's iNaturalist is an app you can download on your phone. So if you just take and you can upload pictures that you've taken 20 years ago, 30 years ago, it doesn't matter. If you know the date and where it was taken, you can log your find.
And we can take questions now since we're at the end of our hour here.
Yeah. If you're interested in checking out our website, our Instagram, there it is on the screen there.
Oh, and also at the end of the presentation, if you'd like a copy of the presentation, this QR code, you can scan it and it will bring you to the presentation so you can look back over some of the stuff we talked
Yeah, if you
about.
want to get a closer look at any of the photos that we may have skimmed past quickly.
Okay, besides the one species that likes burned areas, how do the mushrooms survive fires? Since fire was such a part of maintaining savannas, and how do they coexist? And
Sure.
does that help them or hurt them?
Well, so fungi like the one that we showed earlier play like a really crucial role in that because let's say you have a thriving group ecology of fungi living in the forest and a big fire comes through. It's going to kill all of the fungi that it encounters, right? Any of the trees that are burned up by the fire are the fungus and the mycelium within that tree are going to perish along with it. But when that ground becomes, sort of a barren wasteland, stuff like the Pyranema will come along and go up to that wood and even the soil, the topsoil there that is not potable for those mushrooms that were there previously, and it starts to break those things down into, potable soil that will then uh, bring back the succession of those fungi that would be in a healthy place.
Okay, so fire kills most of them, but the spores,
Yes.
new spores are blown in.
Exactly. Yes.
Okay.
Yep. Or maybe some of the fungus could be living deep underground and then
Oh, okay.
Unaffected root systems,
Right.
what have you.
right that stays safe. But then they're not going to start to produce those fruiting bodies until the ground or the trees nearby are the right environment again. So they have to wait for those sort of fire succession fungi is what they're referred to as. And there's some great studies that you can look into online about sort of the order that these fungi will come in. Like those will come first, and then you have your first wave, second wave. And I don't know off the top of my head, but there's some good studies on sort of what that looks like in different areas. Good
Okay,
question.
thank you.
Any other? I have a couple online.
Sure.
Oh, sure.
Sure.
Um,
Thank you.
Any recommendations for outdoor classes or field excursions for learning about and identifying edible mushrooms?
Come to a Chicago Mushroom Club meetup.
Sure.
So we host
Usually about 2 outdoor meetups a month.
yeah, we talk about edibles, we talk about non-edibles. As far as specifically learning about edibles, Edible Illinois is.
Yeah, we have a friend, Michael Baker with Edible Illinois, who offers some more specific or catered sort of walks where you might be harvest or looking for a specific kind of mushroom to then maybe cook, or ones that you would look for foraging purposes.
Our friend Shane Alden is also a great resource for edible plants, but he in
Certainly
spending
talks about mushrooms as well. And,
yeah, some
and
time with us, I feel like he's grown his fungal knowledge as well. But
yeah, Shane Alden, the Wild Dryad, if you look him up online, he offers courses as well that are really, really in depth. He's a wonderful teacher. I think the best way to learn is to get involved with a small scale organization, maybe in your area. They'll know region specific things. You can ask someone right to their face. You don't
plus
have to
your
dig around on the
local
internet.
mycological associations.
Yes,
like
Illinois.
Mycology
Yep.
Society.
Illinois Mycological Association also offers similar forays and things like that that you can gain so much information from.
Yeah, but it might not be focused on just edibles, but
Sure.
you know, if the more time you spend outside, the more you sort of pick up. And I think that the more all types of fungi will become more interesting than just edible.
Sure, absolutely. Another question.
So does does this offer the one you mentioned for real promise for the control of buckthorn? Because outside
This
of
one,
Boy
it-
Scout Eagle projects, I've seen nothing.
No,
but
no,
step it
it's
down.
it's not much help as far as controlling it. But I still get a little excited when I see it because I'm like, at least there's one
It's a
thing
pushback.
it's affecting the live buckthorn trees, which is exciting to see. It's one of the gymnosporangium ones we talked about earlier, the plant
The
pathogen.
tentacle looking.
They're sort of more of a eyesore. They're not necessarily going to like cause a huge effect on the population, sadly. But I know there are some people who are, chopping down buckthorn and then sort of testing out what kind of fungi break down the dead buckthorn the fastest. And I think maybe there's some promise there as far as recycling it a little quicker, I suppose. But that's not necessarily the
actual
issue, is it?
killing. It's not as
Yeah.
handy as just
No,
human.
I don't think there's
Sure.
anything super promising in the fungal realm for controlling buckthorn specifically in the near future. Maybe in the future, but hopefully we find something.
There's another question online that references the gall that you were
Sure.
talking about earlier.
Yes.
So if they understand you correctly, a gall is actually formed by the tree's response to a wasp laying an egg on a branch or a leaf.
Yes.
Is the tree attempting to shield itself?
So that's an
No.
interesting question. There's sort of some debate about this as well. I've read online that they're not exactly sure how the insect is necessarily convincing the tree to make this sort of incubation chamber, because it's not necessarily just trying to protect. It creates an actual chamber for the larva to exist inside of. Some of them are very, very intricate, specifically designed to hold one tiny maggot, in the center of this gall. And one of the things that we do know is that these insects are typically laying these eggs right into the part of the plant where cell division happens. So it's likely that they're causing some sort of rapid mutation. So instead of producing a new twig or a new branch or a new leaf, it starts to produce this sort of wooden egg sac looking thing. And a couple years back, a young child observed some ants collecting these galls off of trees and rolling them back to their dens. And that hadn't been observed before. So he asked some ant specialists about it, and they were able to find that some of these galls are producing pheromones that attract those ants. And this may be a way for the wasp that's maturing inside that gall to protect itself by being brought into a dungeon where it can't be eaten, right? So it's not eating the ants when it comes out, it's just flying out of the ant tunnel. But that may be why we found the ants inside of this gall. It may have been sniffing out the pheromones, climbed in the hole where the wasp had escaped and got trapped.
but it's not an immune response from the tree itself to produce the gall necessarily.
It's more like a
mutation.
manipulation of the cell dividing area.
Mushrooms are an important food source for wildlife.
Yes.
That's a good question. Yeah, we often do see a lot of
Deer mushroom.
yeah, we do see a lot of what I'm trying to think of the word, but yeah, there's deer that are we see deer constantly going after things like amanita and these bolete mushrooms, the bigger
Pluvians.
spongier ones. There's some mushrooms like the amanita phalloides that we saw earlier, the really, really toxic mushroom that we've observed squirrels eating them with no adverse effects. So we know that certain animals can consume certain toxins that we can't. And so I don't have an exact answer on how much they are consuming, but I've seen plenty of mushrooms stashed into little areas by squirrels for later, you know.
From the
So
sheer amount of nibbles that
Yeah.
we found, nibble marks, I would say that they're
I will
fairly-
say they are a massive source of food for slugs and all insect larvae. Yeah.
yes.
Most mushrooms, you cut them in half and they'll be full of different insect larvae. So maybe more so
Insects are feeding
insects.
but or larger animals.
Exactly,
So
yeah.
it's all a part of the food chain.
Yeah.
Certainly.
Good question though.
So squirrels will eat anything.
Yeah, squirrels are really go
Yeah.
after them. Squirrels love the mushrooms and they'll really hide them out so they'll let them
And
dry
it really
out.
tricks you when you're out in the woods and you're like, what is this weird
Yeah,
you
why
know,
is there a mushroom in the
like-
tree?
Russula growing out of an elm tree? And
Yeah.
then you're like, oh no, that was a
No,
squirrel.
Just tucked away for safekeeping.
Tucking
Yeah.
in the crook.
All right.
All right. Do we have any other questions here?
Any other questions?
No.
Awesome.
All right.
Thank you
Thank you
guys.
so much.
Thank you so much. That was great.